Welcome to this series, The Foundational Questions of Our Time, brought to you by Synergy Circles of the Evolutionary Leaders, specifically the Integral and Holistic Cosmology Synergy Circle and the Cornerstone Synergy Circle. These discussions feature global thought leaders dialoguing with renowned author Riane Eisler on how their transformational work relates to Dr. Eisler's four cornerstones of how we transform cultures from domination consciousness to partnership consciousness, crucial for these challenging times. I'm Dr. Kurt Johnson of Light on Light Publications and Media. Each video will engage Dr. Eisler in a discussion with a global thought leader introduced immediately after this initial introduction of Riane Eisler. Riane Eisler, JD, PhD, is a best-selling author, systems scientist, futurist, cultural historian, and attorney, whose work shows how to build a more equitable, sustainable, and less violent world. Her famous book, The Chalice and the Blade, Our History, Our Future, is now in 57 U.S. printings and 30 foreign editions. Dr. Eisler is president of the Center for Partnership Systems, CPS, and editor-in-chief of the Interdisciplinary Journal of Partnership Studies at the University of Minnesota. She is also the author of Nurturing Our Humanity, How Domination and Partnership Structure Our Brains, Lives, and Future, co-authored with anthropologist Dr. Douglas Fry, Oxford University Press, 2019. And The Real Wealth of Nations, Creating a Caring Economics, hailed by Nobel Peace Laureate Archbishop Desmond Tutu as the template for the better world that we are so urgently seeking. In short, according to dictionaries, a domination hierarchy is a social hierarchy arising when interaction of members of a social system creates a ranking system. Such rankings of who are favored can involve gender, race, economic status, and so on. Dr. Eisler's four cornerstones of how we shift from domination consciousness to partnership consciousness are these, and we invite you to hear our first video with Dr. Eisler in which she elaborates these four elements. The first cornerstone is childhood. The second cornerstone is the attitude toward gender. The third cornerstone is economics, and the fourth cornerstone is story and language. So let's go over now to introduce our guest for this episode. So welcome. We've had another special opportunity to time this episode with major 2023 activities of the Evolutionary Leaders Circle, whose Synergy Circles created this series and of which many of our guests and hosts are a part. We have with us to share this hour with Dr. Eisler, the Reverend Deborah Moldow, who is director of the Evolutionary Leaders, which is a project of the Source of Synergy Foundation. Now, speaking of synergy, both Riane and Deborah are part of a new 2023 book, The Holomovement, Embracing Our Collective Purpose to Unite Humanity, which anchors a major emergent 2023 event of global thought leaders igniting the Holomovement gathering, which you can find out more about at evolutionaryleaders.net and holomovement.org. That's HOLO movement.org. So what could be more fitting for a discussion of the implications of Dr. Eisler's four cornerstones for moving from domination to partnership consciousness? And I want to note also that this episode will be followed by two more with important guests from the Holomovement book and the Holomovement event. Riane's chapter in that book is precisely entitled The Human Transition from Dominance to Partnership, the Four Cornerstones. So let me introduce Deborah further now before we turn the discussion over to them. Reverend Deborah Moldow is director of the Evolutionary Leaders Circle that brings together visionaries committed to the acceleration of the conscious evolution of humanity in these critical times. She continues as a founding member of the United Religions Initiative and serves as vision keeper for a Unity Earth. Deborah served for more than 20 years as the representative to the United Nations for May Peace Prevail on Earth International, which promotes peace pole dedications and world peace flag ceremonies, sending the prayer, "May peace prevail on earth," to every country in the world. Interestingly, Reverend Deborah's life path has led her from the Broadway stage to the pulpit as an ordained interfaith minister, to the United Nations, and all over the world. She is committed to assisting in the transformation of human consciousness that can lead to a culture of peace. Deborah is also the founder and president of Garden of Light, a nonprofit website that offers a gathering place for those who are aligned with the emerging global spirituality. She currently lives in Mexico, where she continues her change-making work. So welcome, Deborah and Riane. I'm going to pass the baton now over to Riane Eisler to welcome Deborah.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Reverend Deborah. May I just call you Deborah?
Yes, please. I'm so delighted to be here with you, Riane, for this very important series on the foundational questions of our time. The Evolutionary Leaders are just thrilled to have you as an active member. You have long been one of the respected elders of the movement toward conscious evolution because of your pioneering research and writing. We're also grateful for your seminal work, The Chalice and the Blade, which made visible the insidious dominator model of Western culture, as well as the alternative of a partnership model that brings the masculine into balance with the feminine in a so much healthier way that can radically change the course of our future towards sustainability and peace. So when the Evolutionary Leaders joined together in 2006, they created a call to conscious evolution, and we're almost at 50,000 signatories right now. So anybody who wants to be that 50,000th person to sign on, go to evolutionaryleaders.net and answer the call. Its message was already in direct alignment with your work and your vision at the Center for Partnerships of Conscious Evolution, and anchored in all of the work you did in The Chalice and the Blade and your most recent books. The call has 8 essential elements, which are cultivating a paradigm of aliveness, educating for evolving consciousness, restoring ecological balance, encouraging conscious media, engaging in social and political transformation, please, working for integrity in commerce, promoting health and healing, and building global community. So none of that can be done without partnerships, and none of that can be done without new vision and a whole new model for how our civilization moves forward. And so now your work promoting the 4 cornerstones that are discussed in this whole series gives us a recipe for building a new culture that is so desperately needed at this moment of choice for all humanity. And that's why it's so important to discuss these foundational questions of our time. So many of us are feeling this evolutionary impulse to build a new way of living on the earth. And we must be mindful that anything that we build needs to begin with a good foundation. And so the 4 cornerstones can serve as guideposts to all of us for how to begin. And you put this really beautifully in your recent conversation with Doug King, when you said, a new worldview requires a new framing of reality. And that is truly the exciting part of this moment that we're in, that where we feel this evolutionary leap in progress. And yet we need those guideposts. And now, 17 years after the call to conscious evolution was established, you are joining our circle of evolutionary leaders. We're so honored to have you with us. And we find ourselves involved together in helping to launch a major initiative in 2023, igniting the Holomovement, which Kurt was referring to earlier, where you and your vision join not only in the book, the Holomovement, embracing our collective purpose to unite humanity, but also in this video series, recognizing your 4 cornerstones as key foundational questions of our time. And all of the elements of the 4 cornerstones are central to igniting that Holomovement. So it's the book, it's the event that the evolutionary leaders are involved in, which is taking place in March 2023. But it is so much more than that. That's why we're calling the event Igniting the Holomovement, because we understand that it's happening. We're not creating it. We're not launching it. We're just trying to light a fire under it, to give it some language and some infrastructure so that it can become visible. And so that all of the people who are in deep alignment with the work of all of our evolutionary leaders in many different domains, with your work, Riane, can find each other and co-create at a whole new level of engagement with one another. So this is a very exciting moment in time. And we are all standing at a kind of a precipice, taking this leap together. And we've been, you also had a wonderful conversation with Ben Bowler, who's been gathering visions for a new earth. And it's not easy to vision into the new, because we're all involved in birthing something that we've never seen before. And I've been thinking about our ancestors sleeping on the earth and eating what they could find. And now we're speaking on the internet from different countries, live and in person. And we are living in a reality of comfort, houses and refrigerators with food available to us at all times. That level of transformation from our ancestors to now and more is what's going to happen in the future. If we are smart enough, wise enough to be able to follow the wisdom of leaders like you and our own internal evolutionary impulse, and create something new, a shining city on the hill.
Well, that is a wonderful summary of really what the Holomovement is all about. And I'm honored to be part of it. You know, Einstein said that we cannot solve problems with the same thinking that created them. And this, I think, is very applicable to the 4 cornerstones, because all of us those of us who want a better future, those of us trying to push us back more to domination, rigid domination times, really have been taught to marginalize nothing less than the majority of humanity, women and children. I mean, think about our conventional categories: right, left, religious, secular, Eastern, Western, Northern, Southern, socialist, capitalist. There's hardly anything about children in these categories. And even though women are beginning to really enter positions of leadership, it's a struggle. It's a struggle. And people, I don't think, are used to thinking of childhood and gender as two cornerstones. And yet, neuroscience, nothing less than neuroscience, tells us that what children first experience and observe, especially in their first 5 years, impacts nothing less than the architecture of our brains, and with it, how we think, how we feel, how we act, how we vote. So really, this is something we have to pay attention to. And as for gender, again, we've all been taught that, oh, well, gender, that's kind of, it's just a women's issue, or, you know, these men who are, or trans people or whatever. It happens to be a key, how a society structures the roles and relations of the two forms of humanity, because there are two basic forms, the male form and the female form. How a society structures these, and yes, whether there are rigid gender stereotypes, which, thank goodness, as part of the movement towards partnership, we're beginning, well, I mean, some of us are trying to leave behind. That is a fundamental principle for social and economic organization. Why? Because think about it for a moment. Anything that is stereotypically, now we're not talking about anything of women against men or men against women or anything inherent in us, anything that's stereotypically coded feminine has low priority in resource allocation, caring, caregiving, nonviolence. So we have to change that devaluation of women and the, quote, feminine. And of course, this is reflected in our economic systems, both socialist and capitalist, where the work of caring for people, starting at birth, keeping a clean and healthy home environment, which translates, of course, into a planetary environment, was to be done for both Marx and for Smith for free by a woman in a male-controlled household. I mean, we have to really look at our history here a little. And the stories and language. We have been taught so many false stories, including, as you really implicit in all of this is that it's possible, but implicit in the conventional normative narratives, whether it be selfish genes or original sin. You know, they fight each other, but it's the same story. We're bad, we're sinful, we're awful, we have to be rigidly controlled from the top. So what has happened, and I'll wind up this, but I wanted to summarize it in a sense before we go further, is that for the last 300 years, during the disequilibrium of the Industrial Revolution going into high gear, we've had movement after movement challenging traditions of domination. And I can elaborate on that, but they have focused primarily on dismantling the top, of the domination pyramid, politics and economics as conventionally defined. And they've left intact the domination orientation of these four foundations. And it is on those foundations that whether it was Hitler in Nazi Germany, whether it was Stalin in the former USSR, whether it was Khomeini in Iran, the Taliban, the so-called rightist fundamentalist alliance, Putin in Russia, it doesn't really matter. They have focused on those four cornerstones, on pushing them back. So we need to pay special attention. We need to do everything we're doing, but we need to pay special attention to those four cornerstones. And I am just so delighted that the Holomovement is having this series, talking with leaders, with you as one of the founders of Evolutionary Leaders, about what, in a way, once you say it, it seems self-evident, doesn't it? I mean, of course, but we have not been taught to think of it this way.
Yes, exactly. And that's why I love your work, because you make these things visible when they are the assumptions that are behind our eyes when we're looking. And, one of our most delightful evolutionary leaders is Dr. Bruce Lipton, who also talks about the first 5 years of life. Just as you mentioned, that is the time during which we are programmed into our society.
Yes.
And when I think of myself as that small a child, and I think of television, which was fairly young in those days, what it was feeding me in terms of the stereotypical roles of women and children, women aspiring to be Miss America. And, you had to look good in a swimsuit and in a ball gown. It was just this image of what it was to be a woman. And that was just before the women's movement started to challenge that and say there's a glass ceiling and women are not rising to the top in executive positions, not because they don't have the talent, but because they are not seen as leaders that way. And what we saw in politics at that time was the women who broke through and rose to the top, like Golda Meir or Angela Merkel in more recent times, or Margaret Thatcher. They were women who were able to take on the mantle of the male, and bring that kind of strength and, appearance of power to their image so that they could be acceptable. And of course, women were thrilled that a woman was rising to the top. Even if she was following this male model, it's like what needed to happen in order to make the bridge so that women leaders who have more of the feminine qualities, like the president of New Zealand, who's now stepping down, can now bring those qualities of leadership. And even the men who have been coming into power recently, not the Putins and the Trumps, who are the old model, but the Obamas or the Bidens, who have the caring and the, what we would call feminine qualities, can be accepted and embraced without falling back on like the military dominant model of what, the general who's leading the country, which, as we know, has gotten us into a lot of trouble.
Yes.
So I love what you say about dismantling the top of the domination pyramid, but not looking at the foundation where those four cornerstones live, at the foundation of the pyramid, and needing to address that.
Well, that is really, I think, something, as I said, we need to work on in all areas, because and there is movement from domination to partnership. I mean, for example, I make a distinction because we have to change our language too. Our language is so really so dominator oriented. One of the examples I give is, instead of killing two birds with one stone, why not hatch two birds with one egg, right? But
thank you. I've always wanted an alternative to that expression.
But the thing is, I've introduced the concept of hierarchies of domination versus hierarchies of actualization. And because a partnership system doesn't have to be completely flat. I mean, we need parents, we need teachers, we need managers, we need leaders. But power, the title of the first book that came out of this multidisciplinary, cross-cultural, transhistorical analysis from a very inclusive perspective now, that includes, as I said, the majority of humanity, women and children, was The Chalice and the Blade, as you know. And and which, by the way, is today in, 56 US printings and about 30 foreign editions. But so it's an evergreen, as they call it in the industry. But the issue is that in the cover of that book, we have the title, The Chalice and the Blade. And sometimes people say, well, these are symbols of masculinity and femininity. And I say, no, these are symbols of power. The blade is a symbol of the power to dominate, to control, to take life. The chalice is a symbol of another kind of power, which is the power to give life, to nurture life, to illuminate life. And really, there's a spiritual dimension to this. And this is why I'm delighted to be part of the Holomovement, because I think that we have, in my book, The Power of Partnership, I really talk about how spirituality is defined so differently depending on the degree of orientation to either the partnership side or the domination side of the partnership domination social scale. Because in the partnership, in the domination system, it's God-fearing, right? Fear. Top-down control.
Terrible expression.
Isn't it? You as a reverend, I mean, this is so important that but these are the people who have very cleverly pushed back the normative ideal for family.
Yes.
I mean, who are totally into rigid gender stereotypes and ranking male over female. And women leaders are disgusting, as Trump said. I mean, it really, we have to get back family. We have to get back morality. And this is a big job.
Well, we can't let the quote unquote other side define the narrative. And they're very good at that.
They're very good at that, and we better be better. But the problem is that it is not only they who have been brought up to marginalize these four cornerstones. I mean, there's beginning to be a movement from authoritarian and violent to authoritative and nonviolent parenting. That's part of the partnership movement.
Yes.
There's beginning to be a movement for gender equity, but it's still marginalized.
Yes.
It's not understood. In economics, I mean, what I've proposed in my book, The Real Wealth of Nations, the subtitle is Creating a Caring Economics. The old model, whether it's socialism or capitalism, really is incomplete. It relegates to just reproductive rather than productive work the three life-sustaining sectors of the economy: the natural economy, the volunteer community economy, and the household economy. So GDP perpetuates that, so that the things that are important to real human beings and to the planet are externalities, right? I mean, it's crazy. A tree
marginalize the most essential aspects of our humanity.
I know, and this is why it's not possible to just add on harmony with nature to a fundamentally imbalanced system.
Mentally imbalanced system. I love that phrase because it feels that way. When I moved to Mexico and I left the United States, I felt like I was stepping out of some matrix. I felt like I could breathe because in the United States, we have a mental imbalance and it's in the zeitgeist. It affects everybody. And I think you are pointing in such important ways to the root causes of that. How can we sustain this crazy system that says that we should dominate one another, which is our history, from decimating the Native Americans to building our economy on slavery? It's always been about who's a real person and who's 3/5 of a person. Well, and what I particularly like, Riane, and I really want to go here with you, is the spiritual aspect. I have never considered myself a feminist because I always felt like you, that it was partnership and balance that we were looking for, not like women's rights. But I'm seeing it differently now because I really am seeing the importance of the rise of the divine feminine.
Yes.
And I have a very dear friend who is originally from India. Her name is Neela Bhattacharya Saxena, and she wrote a book called The Absent Mother God of the West, which you would just absolutely love, because she starts by saying the word God is inherently masculine in our language, and the word goddess is not an equivalent. A goddess is like some beautiful, ethereal, like no power.
That's the marginalization I'm talking about.
Grew up with Kali, the power woman god.
Well, but Kali has been associated also with destruction, primarily. So it's a problem. But I will say this, at least in Hindu mythology, there are still female deities. The divine feminine has not been completely erased, as in the three Judeo-Christian Muslim traditions. But, I do want to make a point here, Deborah, and I think it's an important one. It isn't just the United States. No. I mean, if you look at the Taliban, if you look at Iran, if you look at China, if you look at Putin's Russia, I mean, the domination model exists, and there are nations other than in the United States, and there is, of course, tremendous machismo still in Mexico. I don't have to tell you about that.
That's true.
So it is everywhere.
It's true, but in the United States, we speak the language of equality.
That's true.
Whereas in some of these other cultures, they have never admitted that there's equality between the genders. And I often think about that. What do women do in those cultures to rise above their situation? There are countries where women are born into prostitution. That's what their mothers did. That's what their grandmothers did. And they're born in those same places. And that is the life path is established for them. And there is no way for them to rise up or create a difference in their culture. Whereas in the West, I think we have a special responsibility.
But I agree with that.
We have enough power of choice to speak out, to make a difference.
And I certainly agree with that. And unfortunately, we're seeing, however, a regression to domination big time
It's a
in these
powerful
United
pull, isn't it?
States.
People, why do people want that?
Well, people, if you're born into a domination family, and a God-fearing domination family, where you're taught to equate difference, beginning with the difference between the female and male form, with either superiority or inferiority, with either being served or serving, with either dominating or being dominated, you can really easily have a template for all other in-group versus out-group thinking.
It's programmed in.
It's programmed in. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody born into these families doesn't rebel. I mean, fortunately, there are people who get out of it, but it's not easy. And so our job is to really have, and young people, many young people realize that there's something fundamentally wrong with the stories we've been told, like the story told in The Chalice and the Blade is our story, a story that includes women and men, and that shows that places like Çatalhöyük were, as Ian Hodder, the archaeologist who excavated Çatalhöyük, said, a Gaelic, a partnership society. No signs of destruction through warfare for 1,000 years. He wrote an article for the Scientific American saying, being born a woman or a man, it didn't affect one's place in society. And yes, they were more egalitarian. The houses are of the similar size, the grave goods. You don't have this top-down domination system. So I think that we all need to really understand that there are many trends. I mean, if you look at the last 300 years, you see one progressive social movement after another challenging a tradition of domination. The same thing. You know, the rights of man challenged the divinely ordained right of kings to rule their co-subjects. The abolitionist, civil rights, Black Lives Matter movement challenged the so-called divinely ordained right of a, quote, superior race to rule inferior ones. The feminist movement challenged, again, the divinely ordained right of men to rule over the women and children in the, quote, castles, you know, a military image of their homes, all the way to the environmental movement, challenging our once hallowed and divinely ordained, right? Conquest and domination of nature, which at our level of technological development and population is simply not sustainable. But as I said, we've left the foundations to keep rebuilding themselves in the domination mold. And we have to change that.
We need to address that. And one other thing that I wanted to bring up with you and hear your comments on, again, going back to the chalice and the blade, as you said, of symbols, that the blade, it's not just a symbol of masculinity, but it has a function. It cuts, and it's powerful. And we need a blade to cut our, the fruit off the vine, and those sort of things are needed. But the chalice that has the feminine function to receive as well as to nourish. And as you well know, the chalice is also a religious symbol, such as the chalice that's used to hold the wine in the Christian service of Holy Communion. And to me, the symbol of the chalice is so deeply resonant. As you know, I'm an interfaith minister. I'm the founder of the Garden of Light, and that explores what I see as an emerging global spirituality. And my personal spiritual practice, which I rarely discuss, is based largely on following guidance that I receive that gives me insights and direction that feel like it's coming from a higher source than my own intelligence. And if I listen closely enough, it leads me unerringly. So to me, the symbol of the chalice is so beautiful and so important that I just really want to thank you for that. And I'd like to hear anything else that you would like to say on that topic.
Well, I just think that among the many things, the many words that we must redefine is power. And we must redefine power not to mean power over, but power to, creative power, which we humans have in great abundance, and power with. The power to join with others, not in in-group versus out-group activities, because that, cooperation for that is what we have plenty of. Mm-hmm. But to really recognize our interconnection. And even physics is today, as you know, showing our interconnection in the universe. Mm-hmm. So it's a very exciting time, but it's also a critical time.
And if we can harness the power of partnership, the power of following that inner guidance, the power of, for people of faith to be responding to the higher power, not to dominate others, not to tell others that they're wrong, but to bring us together into a sense of unity as one vast global family that needs to respect and nurture its children for future generations. Then we have a chance to meet the tremendous challenges of global warming and attain a level of peace on this planet that has never happened before.
Well,
so,
it did.
Thank you, Riane. It happened in communities.
It happened.
But it's never happened on a global scale, as far as we know. I mean, we don't really know the ancient history of our planet.
Yeah, everything, but certainly the original direction of our cultural evolution was more in a partnership than a domination direction. We know, for example, from archaeology that warfare is at most 5,000 to 10,000 years old. So that is really very, very important to keep in mind.
Although that may have to do with the development of weapons. Because conflict seems to me to be kind of endemic in human makeup, but the scale of conflict to actually go to warfare requires ways to do harm to one another.
Well, you can use conflict if you are orienting to the partnership side, like our gathering hunting people did for millennia. And you might find my latest book, Nurturing Our Humanity, which came out with Oxford University Press in 2019, the one that's based on neuroscience, very, very informative in that regard. But they did not engage in warfare. Now, they could have. They had spears, they had arrows, bows and arrows. No, I think it has more to do with the culture than it has to do. For example, metallurgy was known in old Europe before the Indo-European invasions, but they used metallurgy for weapons. The Indo-European invaders, the Aryans who came in and conquered the more settled communities in old Europe. But in old Europe, metallurgy was used for decoration, for jewelry. It was not used for weapons. And that's a cultural cultural emphasis.
You know, I think a lot of this goes to the Native American concept of wetiko, the illness of the belief in progress, that because we have more sophisticated machinery and weapons, that we are more advanced than you are. And in that model, you have to continually create progress. But what is progress? What does progress mean? We need a new definition for progress that doesn't mean having more things and conquering more people, but means building a beautiful new culture together where we can care for one another and our precious earth. And for that, Riane, you are a light in our world and an exemplary evolutionary leader. And I honor you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for all the important work you do, you and Kurt and all the other evolutionary leaders.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Riane Eisler, and to our viewers. Each of the subsequent videos in this important video series will feature global thought leaders and activists discussing their work in the context of the Four Cornerstones with Dr. Eisler. And you can update yourself regularly on the series at the websites that will be posted just hereafter. And these include lightonlight.us, centerforpartnership.org, evolutionaryleaders.net, and the Sacred Stories channel at YouTube. That's YouTube at the Sacred Stories channel. Thank you for joining us, and please tell your colleagues about this important video series. This is Dr. Kurt Johnson of Light on Light Media and of the Synergy Circles of the Evolutionary Leaders, a project of the Source of Synergy Foundation. And please also see our emerging work at holomovement.org. That's HOLO movement.org.